What happens when one of the most respected journalists in television sits down with royalty, only to witness a meltdown so shocking that it ends with security escorting a guest off the set? In just 38 seconds, a single comment would unravel an entire interview and expose a side of Meghan Markle that millions never expected to see. This is the story of the interview that never made it to air. The moment that left producers scrambling, cameras rolling, and Diane Sawyer forced to make a decision she never thought she would have to make. Because what started as a professional conversation about life, duty, and public service turned into something else entirely. Something uncomfortable. Something unforgivable. Diane Sawyer has interviewed presidents, world leaders, and countless celebrities throughout her legendary career. She has remained calm through tears, anger, and controversy, but nothing could prepare her for what was about to unfold when Meghan Markle walked onto her set. The interview began like any other. The lights were positioned perfectly. The cameras were rolling. Diane sat across from Meghan with her signature warm smile, ready to ask the thoughtful questions her audience expected. "Thank you so much for being here," Diane said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of genuine interest that has made her an icon in broadcasting. "I know your schedule is incredibly busy, and we are grateful you made time for us today." Meghan smiled, but it was different from the polished smile the world had seen in photographs. There was something sharper behind it. Something calculating. "Well, Diane, I think it is important that people hear the truth," Meghan replied. "There has been so much noise, so many lies, and I am ready to set the record straight on my terms." Diane nodded, maintaining her professional composure. "Of course, and we want to give you that platform. Let's start with your transition away from royal duties. That was a significant decision. Can you walk us through what led to that moment?" It was a softball question, the kind of question that any experienced interview subject could navigate with ease. But Meghan's response was immediate and loaded with an edge that caught everyone off guard. "What led to that moment?" Meghan repeated, her voice rising slightly. "What led to that moment was being trapped in a system that refused to protect me. A system that cared more about tradition than humanity. A system that, quite frankly, was never designed for someone like me." Diane remained calm, nodding as she listened. "When you say someone like you, can you elaborate on what you mean?" "I think you know exactly what I mean, Diane," Meghan said, her eyes narrowing. "But since we are here to speak plainly, I will say it. I was never going to be accepted because I did not fit their mold. I was too American, too outspoken, too different, and, let's be honest, too much of other things they would never say out loud, but everyone knows." The production team shifted uncomfortably behind the cameras. This was going off script quickly, but Diane, ever the professional, pressed forward. "I understand that you felt isolated," Diane said carefully. "Many people who have been in similar positions have expressed feeling that way, but you also had support around you. Your husband, for instance. Did that help?" Meghan laughed, but it was not a laugh filled with warmth. It was bitter. Dismissive. "Support?" she said. "Diane, you have been in this industry long enough to know that support means nothing when the entire institution is working against you. And yes, I had Harry, but even he was limited by what he could do. He was born into that world. I was not, and they made sure I knew it every single day." Diane shifted in her seat, maintaining eye contact. "Can you give me a specific example of a time when you felt unsupported?" "Do you want me to list them all?" Meghan shot back. "Because we would be here for hours. Let me just say this. When I needed help, when I was struggling with my mental health, I was told to keep quiet. I was told it would not look good. I was told to essentially suffer in silence for the sake of appearances. Do you know how damaging that is?" "I can imagine that must have been incredibly difficult," Diane responded, her tone empathetic but measured. "Mental health is something we take very seriously, and I'm glad you are speaking about it now. But I do want to ask, did you seek outside help? Were there resources available to you beyond the institution? And that is when the tone shifted completely. Meghan's expression hardened. Her posture changed. The mask of composure cracked. "Why are you asking me that?" Meghan demanded. "Why is the burden always on me to explain what I did or did not do? Why is no one asking them what they did? Why is no one holding them accountable?" Diane kept her voice steady. "I am not trying to place blame, Meghan. I am simply trying to understand the full picture. Our audience wants to hear your side, but they also want to understand the context." "The context?" Meghan said, her voice rising. "The context is that I was failed. I was abandoned. And now, sitting here, I am being questioned like I am the problem." This is exactly what I'm talking about, Diane. This is the same pattern. Ask the woman what she did wrong. Never ask the institution why it failed her. The room was thick with tension. Producers exchanged worried glances. One of the camera operators shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to keep filming or look away. The energy had changed completely from the beginning of the interview. What was supposed to be a thoughtful conversation had become something else entirely, something hostile. Diane took a breath, choosing her next words carefully. She had been in situations like this before, though rarely this intense. She knew that the next few moments would determine whether this interview could be salvaged or whether it was already beyond repair. "I hear you," Diane said, "and I want to be clear that my intention is not to make you feel attacked. But part of having this conversation means exploring all sides. It means asking questions that might be uncomfortable. That is what journalism is." Meghan leaned forward, her eyes locked on Diane with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "Is that what this is?" Meghan said coldly. "Journalism? Or is this just another interview designed to discredit me? To make me look unstable? To paint me as the villain?" Diane shook her head slowly, her expression showing a hint of disappointment. "That is not what this is at all. I have been doing this for decades, and my goal has always been to give people a fair and honest platform to share their stories. I am doing the same for you." "Are you?" Meghan challenged, leaning even further forward in her chair. "Because it does not feel that way. It feels like you are backing them, like you are part of the same old guard that protects the institution at all costs, like you have already decided what the truth is before I even open my mouth." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Behind the cameras, crew members exchanged concerned looks. This was deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Diane's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her professionalism with remarkable control. "I can assure you, I am not backing anyone. I am here to listen to you, but I also have a responsibility to ask questions that our audience would want answered. That is not an attack. That is conversation. That is what we agreed to when you came here today." Meghan stood up abruptly. The sudden movement caught everyone off guard. Cameras zoomed in instinctively. "Maybe your audience should ask better questions," Meghan said sharply. "Maybe your audience should stop defending a system that is rotting from the inside. Maybe your audience should care more about truth than tradition." Diane remained seated, her voice calm but firm. "Meghan, please sit down. We can continue this conversation, but I need you to take a breath and let's refocus." "Refocus?" Meghan said with a sharp laugh. "You want me to refocus? How about you refocus on doing actual journalism instead of this performance?" The insult hung in the air like a grenade that had just been thrown. Diane Sawyer, a woman who has built her career on integrity, grace, and unshakable professionalism, was just called a performer, accused of not doing real journalism by a guest on her own show. Diane stood up now, her expression no longer warm. It was serious, resolute. This was the moment where her decades of experience kicked in. She knew when an interview had crossed the point of no return. She knew when a guest had moved beyond difficult into completely unacceptable territory. "I think we need to take a break," Diane said, her voice steady, but carrying a weight that everyone in the room felt. Every syllable was measured. Every word was chosen with precision. "Meghan, I have treated you with nothing but respect since you arrived. I have given you space to share your truth. I have asked fair questions. I have listened without judgment. But I will not sit here and be insulted. I will not have my career, my integrity, or my intentions questioned in this way. Not by you. Not by anyone." Meghan crossed her arms defensively, her body language screaming defiance. Her eyes flashed with anger and something else. Disbelief, perhaps. Shock that someone was actually pushing back against her. "Oh, so now you are the victim? That is rich, Diane. That is really rich. That is so typical. The powerful person pretending they are the one being hurt when someone finally tells them the truth." "I am not claiming to be a victim," Diane said, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "But I am also not going to allow this conversation to devolve into personal attacks. If you cannot engage respectfully, then we cannot continue." "Fine," Meghan said sharply. "Maybe I do not want to continue. Maybe this was a mistake from the start. You know what, Diane? You are just like the rest of them. You pretend to care. You pretend to be different. But when it comes down to it, you protect the establishment. You protect the people in power. You are complicit." The accusation was stunning. The crew stood frozen. This was no longer just a difficult interview. This was a complete breakdown. Diane took a step closer, her voice firm but controlled. "Meghan, I am going to ask you one more time to sit down so we can have a constructive conversation. Or, if you prefer, we can end this interview right now. But what I will not do is continue to be spoken to this way." Meghan stared at her, defiance written all over her face. "You want me to leave? Is that it? You want to kick me out because I am telling you the truth you do not want to hear?" "I want you to show the same respect that I have shown you," Diane replied. "That is all I am asking." But Meghan was not done. She turned toward the cameras, speaking directly to them as if Diane was not even there. "This is what happens when you speak truth to power," Meghan said, her voice dripping with drama. "This is what happens when you refuse to play their game. They silence you. They remove you. They make you the problem." Diane had reached her limit. She looked toward her producer and gave a small nod, the kind of nod that communicated everything without words. "We are done here," Diane said, her voice calm but absolute. "Meghan, I am going to have to ask you to leave." Meghan's eyes widened in shock. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Diane said. "This interview is over. I gave you every opportunity to have a meaningful conversation. I extended respect and patience. But you have made it clear that you are not here for a dialogue. You are here to grandstand. And I will not be a part of that." "You cannot kick me off your show," Meghan said, her voice rising in disbelief. "Do you have any idea who I am?" And there it was. The line that would define the entire moment. The words that exposed everything Diane had suspected from the beginning. The entitlement. The arrogance. The belief that the rules did not apply to her. Diane looked at Meghan with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "Yes, Meghan, I know exactly who you are. And that is precisely why I am asking you to leave." The silence that followed was deafening. Meghan stood there, stunned, as if she could not believe what was happening. For someone who had spent years navigating public perception and media appearances, this was unfamiliar territory. She opened her mouth to say something, but Diane cut her off with a raised hand and a firm voice. "My team will escort you out," Diane said, gesturing toward the door, where security personnel had quietly appeared. "I wish you well, but this conversation is over. There is nothing more to discuss here today. For a moment, it seemed like Meghan might refuse, like she might dig her heels in and force a confrontation. But then reality seemed to set in. She grabbed her bag from the chair beside her, her movements sharp and angry. "This is unbelievable," Meghan muttered. "This is absolutely unbelievable." She turned and walked toward the door, her heels clicking loudly against the studio floor. But before she reached the exit, she spun around one last time, pointing at Diane. "You are going to regret this," Meghan said, her voice shaking with anger. "When people find out what you did here today, you are going to regret this." Diane did not flinch. She stood tall, her hands folded in front of her, her expression unreadable. "I will take my chances," Diane said simply. And with that, Meghan stormed out, the door slamming behind her with a force that echoed through the entire studio. The crew stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to do or say. Cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of the aftermath. Diane slowly sat back down in her chair, her composure intact despite everything that had just unfolded. She looked directly into the camera, her voice calm and measured. "Sometimes," Diane said quietly, "an interview reveals more in what is not said than in what is. And sometimes the way a person handles a difficult question tells you everything you need to know." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "We will take a break," Diane continued, "and when we come back, we will continue with our scheduled programming." But everyone in that room knew that what had just happened was bigger than anything they had planned. This was not just a failed interview. This was a moment, a line in the sand, a refusal to tolerate behavior that crossed every boundary of respect and decency. As the crew began to reset, whispers filled the studio. What just happened? Did that really just happen? How do we handle this? Diane sat quietly, reviewing her notes, her face betraying nothing of the storm that had just passed through her studio. Because that is who Diane Sawyer is. A professional, a journalist, someone who has seen it all and refuses to compromise her standards for anyone, no matter their title or status. And Meghan? She was already gone, escorted out by security, her moment of confrontation immortalized on tape, but destined never to see the light of day. At least not in the way she intended. Because what Meghan did not understand in that moment, what her anger and entitlement blinded her to, was that she was not in control. She never was. The moment she walked into that studio, she was a guest. And guests, no matter who they are, do not get to dictate the terms. They do not get to insult the host. They do not get to derail the conversation and expect no consequences. Diane Sawyer had given her every chance, every opportunity to course correct, to take a breath, to engage with respect. But Meghan chose a different path. She chose confrontation over conversation. She chose ego over empathy. And in doing so, she sealed her own fate. The interview that was supposed to be Meghan's moment to control her narrative became something else entirely. It became a cautionary tale about what happens when entitlement meets accountability. When someone so used to being catered to finally encounters a boundary they cannot cross. In the green room, Meghan paced back and forth, her team trying to calm her down. But she was beyond reason. She was furious, humiliated, shocked that someone had actually stood up to her. "How dare she?" Meghan kept saying. "How dare she treat me like that?" But back in the studio, Diane was already moving forward, because that is what professionals do. They do not dwell. They do not spiral. They acknowledge what happened, learn from it, and continue. One of the producers approached Diane cautiously. "Are you okay?" she asked. Diane looked up and smiled, a real smile this time. "I am fine," she said. "That was uncomfortable, but it was necessary." "What do we do with the footage?" the producer asked. Diane thought for a moment. We archive it. We document it. But we do not air it. Not because we are protecting anyone, but because it serves no purpose. The interview never reached a point where it could provide value to our audience. It was just chaos. The producer nodded, understanding the wisdom in Diane's decision. As the day wound down and the crew packed up, the story of what happened in that studio began to spread. Not through official channels, but through whispers, through texts, through phone calls between people who could not believe what they had witnessed. And while Meghan tried to control the narrative from her end, painting herself as the victim of yet another establishment figure, those who were actually there knew the truth. They saw who instigated. They saw who disrespected. They saw who refused to engage in good faith. Diane Sawyer did not need to defend herself. Her actions spoke for themselves. She had conducted herself with grace, professionalism, and firm boundaries. She had given respect and expected it in return. And when that respect was not given, she made a decision that few in her position would have the courage to make. She ended it. She walked away from what could have been a ratings goldmine. She prioritized dignity over drama. She chose integrity over sensationalism. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching, everyone who heard the story later, what real strength looks like. Not the performative strength of someone loudly proclaiming their victimhood, but the quiet strength of someone who knows their worth and refuses to compromise it for anyone. The interview that never aired became legendary for all the wrong reasons. Not because of what was said, but because of what was revealed. About entitlement, about respect, about the difference between someone who has earned their place through decades of hard work and someone who believes their title alone grants them immunity from basic decency. Meghan walked into that studio thinking she was untouchable, thinking her status would shield her from consequences, thinking she could say and do whatever she wanted, and the world would simply accept it because of who she was. But Diane Sawyer had interviewed people far more powerful, far more famous, far more influential, and none of that mattered when basic respect was absent. Because in Diane's world, the world of real journalism, everyone is held to the same standard. Everyone is expected to engage with honesty and integrity. And everyone faces consequences when they choose not to. The moment Meghan said, "Do you have any idea who I am?" she lost. Because that question, that desperate grasp at importance, revealed everything. It showed that beneath the polished exterior, beneath the carefully crafted image, was someone who still measured worth by status rather than character. And Diane, without raising her voice, without losing her composure, without descending to pettiness, simply said, "No." She said, "This is my studio. These are my standards. And if you cannot meet them, you need to leave." It was a master class in setting boundaries, in refusing to be bullied or manipulated, in standing firm even when faced with someone determined to paint themselves as the victim of your cruelty. Because that is what Meghan tried to do. In the aftermath, in the statements that followed, she tried to frame herself as the target of yet another institution that refused to let her speak her truth. But the people who were there, who saw what actually happened, knew better. They saw someone who came in with an agenda. Someone who was not interested in dialogue, but in monologue. Someone who wanted a platform, not a conversation. And when that platform came with expectations of mutual respect, when it required her to actually engage rather than perform, she crumbled. The irony was not lost on anyone. Meghan had spent so much time talking about being silenced, about not being allowed to speak, about being controlled. And yet, when given a genuine opportunity to share her perspective in a respectful environment, she could not handle it. She could not navigate the basic give and take of an interview. She could not tolerate questions that asked her to reflect or provide context. She wanted validation, not examination. She wanted agreement, not inquiry. And when she did not get it, she lashed out. Diane Sawyer had seen it all before. Different faces, different circumstances, but the same pattern. People who are so convinced of their own narrative that they cannot see beyond it. People who mistake any question as an attack. People who confuse accountability with persecution. And every time, Diane had handled it the same way. With patience, with professionalism, with a willingness to give people space to find their footing, but also with clear boundaries about what would and would not be tolerated. This time was no different, except that this time, the person across from her had a platform that amplified everything, had followers who would believe whatever version of events she presented, had the ability to shape public perception in ways that most guests could not. But Diane did not let that influence her decision. She did not think about the potential backlash, or the headlines, or the social media storm. She thought about what was right, what was fair, what was necessary, and she acted accordingly. In the days that followed, people would debate what happened. Some would side with Meghan, believing her claims of being attacked. Others would defend Diane, recognizing the professionalism she displayed under impossible circumstances. But for those who were actually there, who witnessed it firsthand, there was no debate. They saw a journalist trying to do her job, and they saw a guest who refused to let her.